My boss fired me for lacking creativity after I designed their best-selling product line. "We need fresh perspectives for our next launch," she explained during my termination. "Someone who understands current market trends." I thanked her for the feedback and left without revealing my plans. That night, I got a call. "3 temps can do your job for half the cost. Brim, you're simply not cost-effective anymore." The word cost-effective didn't even sting. It landed soft like dust on the polished table between us. What cut deep was how he said it, leaning back in that Italian leather chair. I helped approve for the executive floor. His voice was casual, indifferent, like he was canceling a subscription I had given 18 years. I had built the entire compliance infrastructure from a 2-person skeleton into a system so airtight, it had passed 5 federal audits without a single citation. I trained 3 generations of analysts, and just like that, I was a number in a spreadsheet. A restructuring, that's what they called it. Strategic labor cost realignment. On paper, it meant my salary was too high. But behind his words, behind that polite corporate cadence, I saw something else. Fear, a flicker in his eyes when I didn't flinch. He was terrified not of losing money, but of me, of what I knew. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. But don't confuse silence with consent. Stay with me till the end because the truth flips the story completely on its head. I looked down at the manila envelope sliding across the table. Severance final pay. A non-disclosure agreement. His hand stopped just short of mine. "Waiting. I assume you'll want to take the afternoon," he added. I didn't answer. I reached for the envelope, not with trembling fingers, but with steady hands. My thumb grazed the company logo embossed in gold. I closed it without reading. Then I did something he wasn't expecting. I picked up the ceramic dish sitting near the edge of the table, the one with the stale biscotti. No one ever ate. I placed it carefully back on the tray, wiped the crumbs into my palm. I wasn't going to leave a mess for the next woman who'd sit here. When I rose, the chair let out a soft sigh. I didn't push it back hard or make a statement with the exit. I simply stood, straightened the collar of my navy blazer, and took one last look at the floor-to-ceiling window. The city below looked exactly as it did yesterday, but I was no longer looking down at it. I was seeing through it. As I walked down the hallway, the low of the HVAC system echoed like a hollow tunnel. No one made eye contact. The junior team looked up and then quickly down at their screens. One of them, the youngest, opened her mouth slightly like she wanted to say something, but I shook my head once. "Not here. Not now." I passed the break room, the same half-empty coffee pot, the cheap creamer, the post-it notes on the fridge, asking people not to steal lunches. My mug was still there, white porcelain, a blue striped chip trim. I left it. Let them figure out who it belonged to. At the elevator, I pressed the button once. No double check. No turning back. Just as the doors began to slide open, I glanced at my reflection in the polished chrome. I didn't look broken. I looked clear. As the elevator descended, my phone buzzed once. Then again. I didn't check. I knew the pattern, HR confirmation. Exit instructions, possibly a performative. "We'll miss you." I knew better. Tomorrow, they'd realize what they'd really lost. But by then, I'd be somewhere else unreachable, unbothered, and very much aware of the chaos that was about to unfold. I didn't pack up right after the termination meeting. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed 3 lines of code. Only I knew. Locking down the core compliance system I had built in my 4th year at the company. No one paid attention. They were used to seeing me upright, focused typing non-stop. They thought I was working as always. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I began to disappear, but with precision. One of the junior analysts called IT, she couldn't access the legacy framework directory. I had rang my extension business as usual. I answered calmly. I'm no longer the contact for that. No bitterness. No edge. Just fact. They tried to reset the system. Unaware that I'd written the architecture they were fumbling through. I began removing the permissions quietly, not deleting, just concealing the archives I'd protected for years. Internal audits, policy revisions, compliance maps were now encrypted and moved to a secure drive with a secondary copy sent to a dormant email account I created back in 2012. No one noticed. No one asked. I saved every edit trail, 18 years of files flagged. Transactions, quietly altered clauses. Internal proposals I'd submitted and been told were too detailed or too expensive to implement. I printed 2 sets. One, I sealed in an envelope. The other, I mailed to a private banking address overseas, addressed to the only person I trusted, my cousin in Toronto. She's a licensed auditor. She doesn't know what's coming, but I do, and if anything collapses, she'll know what to do. I slipped on a pair of thin black gloves before closing the laptop, not to hide fingerprints, just to exit clean. That night, I walked out of the building like I always did. No cardboard box, no coat draped dramatically over my arm, just one black leather bag, old but reliable. The elevator doors closed behind me. So did the executive suite's silent glass doors. No one ran after me. No one saw me leave. I didn't expect them to. I walked home, no cab. I needed the wind, the distance, the quiet. The March air was sharp and bracing. I didn't feel sadness. I felt weightless. For 18 years, I had always glanced back. This time I didn't look back, but I still had the key. Before bed, I logged into a system no one knew existed. I built it for myself years ago. I called it failover. It wasn't a backup. It was proof. 3 days later, the first call came from a blocked number. I didn't answer. 4 more came that week from a junior VP, a compliance coordinator, and eventually from the executive assistant of the man who let me go. Still, I said nothing. No text, no call, not even a read receipt. Silence became my architecture. Then came the email, subject line urgent. Possible data breach in internal system. It was sent at 2:14 a.m. flagged high priority. A ping in the night, I ignored. By Monday morning, the whispers had turned to tremors. 2 clients flagged discrepancies in reporting. A third escalated publicly. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but in a tightly regulated banking sector, it only takes 1 leak for the sharks to smell blood. And this time, I was the missing plug. A former colleague, Darren, someone I trained, texted me privately. They're scrambling. Audit logs are incomplete. The executive floor is losing it. Then a second message, they said you took something they're looking at IT. Access history. I left him on read. It wasn't revenge. It was restrained. The systems were still functional but fractured. The parts they thought were plug and play weren't designed to be separated. I built the core compliance model as an ecosystem, not a stack of files. When they removed me, they removed context. They were running blind, and I had all the light. One of the calls that week came from his direct line. No assistant, no filter. I didn't answer. He left a message. Brim, I know you're upset. This isn't personal. We were advised to cut costs across senior roles. If there's anything you'd be willing to help clarify. His voice cracked slightly on the word clarify. It wasn't the tone of a confident leader. It was the tone of a man who knew he'd made a mistake, but couldn't afford to say it out loud. I listened to the message once, then archived it. I started getting calls at home. I never gave out that number. Only one person on staff had it, and she must have been coerced. Then emails started arriving from legal, from HR, from an outside consultant asking for collaborative insight. They used words like urgent, critical, unforeseen gaps, reconstructive timeline. They didn't use the word help, but it hovered between every line I brewed. Coffee, let it go cold, watered my plants, took long walks. For the first time in 18 years, I woke without an alarm. I was still, but not stagnant. I was watching, waiting. I logged into their public site where disclosures had to be posted per compliance regulation. A new notice had been added, update adjustments to our internal controls, following advisory resignation. They had called me an advisory resignation. I laughed. They didn't fire me. They deleted me. But deletion doesn't work on systems built with memory. Sometimes the hardest part isn't proving them wrong. It's choosing not to answer when they come begging for your voice. Have you ever held back your truth, not out of fear, but out of power? That Thursday, I received a courier envelope at my door, hand-delivered. No signature required. Inside was a printout, not digital. Old school. It was a snapshot of system logs manual. Annotations scribbled in panic. Red ink circled missing entries, flagged inconsistencies. Timestamps that didn't align. At the bottom in his handwriting, if you're willing to talk. I'm available. Please, no letterhead. No legalese. Just desperation. That night, I opened the windows of my apartment and let the city noise in. I stood barefoot on the cold tile, letting the night air touch my skin. The skyline blinked with boardroom mistakes. I thought of all the years I kept things running, so no one else had to know the chaos behind the curtain. All the late nights, all the cover-ups. I politely flagged, but was told to handle discreetly. Now they wanted me to clean it up again, but this time, they would have to pay the full price. Not in money and exposure. I placed the courier envelope in my fireplace and lit it. The red ink curled and blackened. The phone rang again. This time I answered. I didn't say hello. I said, "Why now?" It started with a single message from a woman named Celeste Park, managing director at a mid-tier investment bank. I used to compete against a decade ago. She'd been the sharp one in meetings, quiet, calculated, and always watching. We hadn't spoken since a compliance panel in 2014. She remembered everything. Subject: "Are you free for coffee?" No obligations. Just respect. There was no logo. No pitch. Just that line. I sat with it for a full day. Then I replied, "We met in a bookstore cafe near the harbor neutral ground." She wore a blazer over jeans and brought no assistant, no files, no laptop. I respected that. I didn't bring anything either. "I saw your name," she said simply, "and I saw the filings. I read between the lines." I said nothing. I didn't need to. "I'm not here to hire you out of pity," she continued. "I'm here because you built something no one else understood until you were gone, and because we need someone who can rebuild intentionally." That word landed softly. Intentionally. I looked at her fingers wrapped around a ceramic cup. Green tea. Not coffee. Calm hands. She wasn't desperate. She wasn't recruiting. She was choosing. She pulled out a small notepad. Just 3 words written in pen, blank slate. Authority, discretion. That was the offer. Not a title. Not a salary figure. A proposal of space to create and to be respected in the process. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just whispered, "I'd start by eliminating departments that exist just to slow down integrity." She chuckled. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." We didn't talk contracts. We didn't even shake hands. We just sat, 2 professionals who'd survived long enough to speak without translating. When I walked out into the sunlight, I felt no vindication, no celebration, just a long breath, as if my lungs were relearning how to hold space again. At the new office, there was no tour, no onboarding slideshow, just an empty desk and a secure login. I set up myself. I didn't tell anyone from my old company. I didn't update my LinkedIn. Some bridges don't need to be burned. They need to be left alone to rot quietly. On my first morning, I reviewed their internal structure. It was solid but too cautious, designed by people afraid of rocking the boat. I wasn't afraid anymore. A young analyst knocked gently and slid in a file for review. She looked like someone who had never been allowed to speak in meetings. I handed it back with a note. "I want your opinion, not just your math." She blinked once, then smiled like someone who'd been waiting for that line her whole career. Later that week, Celeste passed me in the hallway and said, "We're giving you full access to legacy architecture. Your name's on the blueprint now." I didn't thank her. I just said, "Then let's draw it clean." It was Darren again. He asked to meet as a friend, which was a stretch, considering he hadn't so much as liked a single internal proposal of mine in 5 years. But something in his message was off. Less networking, more confessional. I agreed. Neutral ground again. A park bench beneath a willow tree far from the city's buzz. He arrived late or guilt like cologne. "I shouldn't even be talking to you," he started. "No. Hello? But I need you to know, you were never too expensive." That was a cover. I didn't flinch. He looked around before speaking again, like a man smuggling more than secrets. "They needed you gone before the audit review." That word audit, I knew it. I just never expected someone to say it out loud. "They didn't want you flagging the new executive partnership contracts. The ones rushed through in Q4. There's a clause that redirects a percentage of non-declared surpluses into a discretionary fund. It's off ledger, and it's going to the holding company. Offshore." His voice cracked. He wasn't built for this kind of weight. "They used your system for years to prevent this kind of thing. But then they started bypassing parts of it. Quietly, you designed everything too clean, too traceable." I folded my hands, rested them on my lap. "You're saying I got fired because I made the system too honest?" Darren nodded. "They knew if you saw those files, you'd raise hell. So they made it about cost. They made it look like strategy." He handed me a folder thin but heavy in implication. Inside, printouts of contracts redlined with dates that didn't align, signatures that didn't match. One had my old initials typed next to a field I never approved. At the bottom of the folder, a single paperclip warped and hanging loosely. A system once meant to hold everything together, now bent beyond repair. I didn't thank him. I didn't promise anything. I just nodded once and walked away. The folder tied in my hands. I felt it in the paper, the truth had weight. Back home, I placed the documents on my kitchen counter. The overhead light flickered as I turned the pages. It was all there, fraud masked as efficiency, strategy masking, self-preservation. I stared at my reflection in the microwave door, barely visible in the glass. How many things had I ignored? How long had I been keeping the system alive that was now being used to erase me? I reached for my phone. My hands didn't shake. My thumb hovered over a name I hadn't touched in years, Miriam Toland, a senior investigative auditor with ties to the SEC. She and I once argued over framework philosophy at a conference in D.C. We hadn't spoken since, but she had principles and I had documents. I pressed the call button. She picked up on the third ring. "Brim," she said, voice flat, but alert. "I didn't expect. I have something you need to see, something you'll want documented before the next quarter closes." Pause. Then where and when I gave her the address. I didn't explain more. I didn't need to. That night, I took the bent paper clip and set it beside my laptop. Not to use, just to remember. They thought I was the system's memory. They forgot I was also its conscience. The news broke on a Thursday morning, not on headlines, not on public forums, but within the silent corridors of power. A confidential review request had been submitted to the board's audit subcommittee, anonymous tip, time-stamped attached with over 80 pages of evidence. Of course, I wasn't named, but I recognized the formatting, the folder structure, the deliberate tone. Miriam had done exactly what I expected her to: pull the thread carefully, methodically. By the following Monday, internal meetings were quietly cancelled. Email threads stopped mid-conversation. The leadership Slack went dark. They were afraid, but not of public shame. They were afraid of something worse being read. That same day, Celeste walked into my new office and handed me a plain envelope. She didn't sit. She didn't speak. Inside was a proposal. One line bolded: Project Structural Recovery for Former Institution Lead Role, Brim Dillard. Underneath it, a note in Celeste's handwriting. "They're asking for help, but you don't owe them anything." It came hours later. Someone from the old company, anonymous, had sent it. No card. Just the broken brass nameplate from my old door, cracked at the center, wrapped in a velvet pouch. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the edge with my thumb. Even broken, it carried weight. But now it didn't carry me. The next day, I entered the building. I once helped build this, time as an outside consultant, not an employee. A different badge, a different stance. No apology. No nods exchanged, only wary glances. I walked the same hallway in different shoes. They didn't fit the floor anymore, and I liked that. At the executive boardroom, they waited stiff silent. The same man who had said I was not cost-effective rose half-heartedly to greet me. "Brim," he said, trying to coat familiarity over regret. I let the silence speak, then I placed the design blueprint on the table, not to fix, to rebuild. "Here's what I'll do," I said, voice flat. "I'll trace back every bypass you authorized, every system override, not to punish, but to prevent." They fidgeted, avoided my eyes. "I'm not here to restore your reputation. I'm here to restore compliance." He cleared his throat. "Of course. And we're grateful you're willing to. I'm not doing it for you." I looked out the window. The skyline remained unchanged, but everything beneath it had shifted. There are people working 3 levels down who still believe this place is worth saving. I'm doing it for them. I spent the next 48 hours reviewing server access logs, interviewing mid-level staff, restoring the chain of custody and system controls they'd half destroyed. Not a single thank you, not a single apology, but I didn't need one. I wasn't back for redemption. I was back for reconstruction. Late into the second night, I opened a locked drawer in my new office and placed the broken nameplate inside. Carefully, not to preserve it, but to bury it. I opened the window. Cool air drifted in. Behind me, the monitors hummed. The code aligned. The system, this time, would breathe on its own. The board called it a success. The regulators called it a recovery. I called it closure, but not the kind that ends something, the kind that opens space. 3 weeks into the rebuild, I asked for a room on the lower floor, a room they hadn't used in years. Once a training center, now a storage dump for unused hardware and outdated HR posters. No one had stepped foot in it since 2019. I cleaned it out myself, pulled down the yellowed banners, hauled out old monitors, swept the dust from the corners, not because I had to, because I needed to. I turned it into a training hub, not for onboarding, Not for HR compliance, for resilience. I invited 3 junior analysts, 2 of whom had been overlooked for promotions during the last restructuring. The third had once covered for me during a triple audit while nursing her mother in the hospital. I handed them printed packets, not PowerPoints, not PDF links, real paper, real ink. Each packet carried a section of the new system logic, modular, transparent, and most of all, shareable. No more single-point dependencies. No more silent experts whose work could be erased with a severance letter. One of the analysts asked, "Why are you showing us all this?" I looked at her, "Because I'm leaving. Not now, but soon. And when I do, I want this place to survive the next purge." The other 2 looked confused. The first one just nodded. I wrote line after line of process logic, not attributed to myself. No initials. No authorship. What mattered wasn't who built it. It was that anyone could maintain it. That was the legacy worth protecting. Outside the room, the company was still in chaos quietly. There were still board members scrambling to reposition their reputations, still whispers about who signed what, who benefited, but none of them came near this floor. This floor felt like a clean draft, like something that could begin again without being erased later. One afternoon, Celeste visited the room. She didn't speak at first, just stood at the door watching. "You could stay," she finally said. I smiled, not with triumph, but with release. "I could, but I won't." She nodded, almost expecting it. "There's a difference between being necessary and being irreplaceable." I said I was both. And that was the problem. I returned to my apartment the next evening and stood on the balcony holding a worn-out folder. My personal notes, legacy drafts, old credentials. I didn't burn it. I didn't archive it. I placed it in a drawer, locked it, and turned off the light. The system didn't need me anymore, and that was exactly what I had wanted to build all along. I didn't come back to get even. I came back to build something that couldn't be broken again. Not by ego, not by silence, not by fear. And you, have you ever created something so strong? It no longer needs you to protect it.